Donald Trump is trying to use the Supreme Court to end birthright citizenship, and thankfully right now it seems like they might not be taking his side, but they're flooding the zone right now, because this isn't the only thing the Supreme Court is ruling on today. We're gonna have to talk about that too, but in the meantime, as you can see, several of the justices are pressing Cecilia Wang, who's representing the class of immigrants challenging President Trump's birthright citizenship order on the question of domicile. One of the government's leading arguments is that Wong Kim Ark, a key precedent that granted citizenship to a man of Chinese descent in the 19th century, repeatedly stressed the idea that in order to be entitled to birthright citizenship, a person must intend to permanently live in the country, in other words, to be domiciled. Wang responded by saying that the domicile, while included in the opinion, was not a central holding of the Wong Kim Ark precedent, and therefore not required. There has been a big argument within the Supreme Court over Trump's move to end birthright citizenship, a ruling that essentially decides you are constitutionally protected as a citizen if you were born here on American soil. Donald Trump challenging this and trying to get the Supreme Court to go after it is a blatant anti-constitutional move. Not unconstitutional, anti-constitutional. So we're going to read all of the updates and parts of this story so far as we read through the timeline and catch up with things, because all this has been going down today and we're just now getting on it, so let's hop right in. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson closed out a U.S. Solicitor General D. John Sauer's primary round of arguments, expressing her incredulity that President Donald Trump's order is practically workable. Guidance documents released by federal agencies suggested that even newborns of U.S. citizens will have to jump through extra hoops to claim access to public benefits. This is because if you're not just considered a citizen for having been born here, even if you are a citizen and you were born here and both your parents are citizens, it's going to make it harder to prove that when you try to get anything done that requires you to prove your citizenship. And you may not think about that much now, but there are a lot of things that you do and need to do that require you to do such a thing. Just making your daily life harder is not going to solve anything. I promise you. If you're a conservative, a MAGA type watching this, I assure you that ending birthright citizenship will not make you happy, and it will not make your life better, nor will it save America. Sauer said that parents would instead have the opportunity to dispute wrongful determinations denying their children citizenship. Otherwise, he said, it will be verified by either an automated check of a parent's legal status within federal databases, or by the presentation by parents of documents showing their permanent lawful residence or citizenship. So 99% of the people who will be affected by this will just be legal, law-abiding, valid citizens who will just have to jump through more hoops. Ironically, the same logic as to why most conservatives don't like gun legislation, but let's not go any further into that. Native Americans in an 1884 case feature heavily in Trump's argument. Ooh. Throughout the birthright citizenship case, the Trump administration has repeatedly pointed to Native Americans to argue that not all people born in the United States are necessarily citizens. The Justice Department leans heavily on a 1884 Supreme Court precedent, handed down just a few years after the 14th Amendment was ratified. To make its case, something Justice Neil Gorsuch has just asked about in oral arguments, Elk v. Wilkins centered on John Elk, who was born into a Native American tribe but later left the tribe and attempted to vote in an election in 1880. Charles Wilkins, the election official in Omaha, denied his registration. Elk sued, and the High Court decided that the guarantee of citizenship for people born on American soil didn't apply to Native Americans because they owed their allegiance to the tribe to which they were born. That is a nearly identical argument that Solicitor General D. John Sauer is making about immigrants who are in the country illegally. The court's earliest case interpreting the clause squarely rejected the premise that anyone born in U.S. territory, no matter the circumstances, is automatically a citizen so long as the federal government can regulate them, Sauer told the Supreme Court, citing the Elk case. Now, it is amazing to me that after years of whining whenever the left calls the right racist, they come out and say, so here's why we need to end birthright citizenship for the children of immigrants in America. Because you see, it would be a lot like the ways that America oppressed Native Americans in the 1800s. We need to emulate that. Just overtly calling back to that is crazy. Just very blatant, you know what I mean? Trump leaves the Supreme Court before arguments conclude. That's right, Trump was there. I believe it was the first time a president has ever been present while the Supreme Court is arguing on something like this. I think it's generally considered, like, bad practice for the president to sit there, like, while the Supreme Court comes to a decision on something that they're pushing for. But, you know, Donald Trump, he doesn't tend to follow the general rules of how things tend to go. President Donald Trump made an early exit from the Supreme Court today during oral arguments over his attempts to limit birthright citizenship. The president left around 11:20 a.m. Eastern Time, roughly halfway through the arguments. He stayed throughout Solicitor General D. John Sauer's questioning and left silently while the justices were questioning ACLU lawyer Cecilia Wang. According to his schedule, Trump was hosting an Easter lunch at the White House at 12:30 p.m. Trump was seated in the first row of the public section, typically reserved for members of Congress. He is the first sitting president to attend Supreme Court oral arguments, and his presence led to heightened security at the court. Well, yeah, they had to have the Secret Service there. That probably made it a little bit harder to get all that done. Immigration advocates appeal to a higher power to sway conservatives. Some advocates fighting President Trump are speaking directly to conservative justices on how fundamental one's faith can be to identity and citizenship. They're not going to take that. They're not going to bite. They don't believe any of that stuff. They just use it as a weapon. Conservative justices press ACLU on broad birthright citizenship argument. The tenor of the Supreme Court's arguments has shifted during the second half of the argument, with several conservative justices asking ACLU attorney Cecilia Wang difficult questions about her position supporting near-automatic birthright citizenship. Difficult questions about supporting the constitutional standard. Wow. Justice Samuel Alito, in particular, pressed the idea that the framers of the 14th Amendment might have understood birthright citizenship to apply to a more narrow group of people, citing a hypothetical about a child born to Iranian parents. In some cases, he said, it sure seems like that makes them subject to a foreign power. Why would they have come up with the idea of birthright citizenship if it was not ever supposed to apply to the people that birthright citizenship pretty much always applies to? Like, birthright citizenship wasn't like the idea of being born on American soil. Like, that is the thing that makes you American. That is how it's written. Anyway, here we go. Crowds gather outside the Supreme Court. Crowds have grown outside the Supreme Court as justices inside hear oral arguments over birthright citizenship. With the sun shining on a warm spring day, protesters have gathered directly next to the court chanting "Protect Birthright Citizenship." People hold signs with messages ranging from "Defend the Constitution" and "Families belong together" to "Dump Trump." True. That's why Wong Kim Ark sued for citizenship? Yeah, and that's an already existing precedent, but unfortunately, I don't think it sways in the favor of birthright citizenship. I think that decision did go in favor. I forget what the conclusion was on it. We're reading a lot, okay? We're brainstorming right now. We're getting brain blasted. Didn't the Supreme Court already rule on Trump's birthright order? Well, sort of. You'd be forgiven if you feel some deja vu while today's arguments unfold at the Supreme Court. That's because the justices have already looked at President Donald Trump's birthright citizenship order last spring, but for different reasons. When Trump's executive order first reached the court, the justices didn't decide whether it was legal, as they'll do this time around. Instead, they answered a highly technical but important question of whether lower courts have the power to block its implementation through nationwide injunctions, in which a single judge can prevent officials from carrying out a government policy across the entire country, not just their judicial district. In a 6-3 ruling, penned by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, the court's conservative majority said that such rulings were improper in cases brought by private plaintiffs. Basically, the Supreme Court has already determined that this, if passed, cannot be challenged by any lower court. If this is passed, it's the law. The law is the law. There's no recourse to challenge it. Not by a lower court. You would have to get it all the way to the Supreme Court. Kavanaugh and Barrett ask if the 14th Amendment's carve-outs are frozen in time. Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett both pressed ACLU attorney Cecilia Wang on her assertion that the carve-outs in the 14th Amendment should be seen as frozen in time rather than something that could be extrapolated to the modern era by analogy. You cannot argue. You cannot tell me that conservative Supreme Court justices are arguing that we need to consider how the founding fathers would have well, not founding fathers, but how our predecessor political figures in the past would have wanted the Constitution to be interpreted from a modern perspective. You know, the same people who say, well, the Second Amendment doesn't matter whether they predicted there'd be full auto rifles and semi-auto rifles and pistols. It doesn't matter what they could have predicted. All right, they protected the right to bear arms. Kavanaugh raised the question first, while referencing the exercise and finding historical analogies that the court has embraced in Second Amendment cases. He pointed specifically to children of undocumented children and wondered whether, in the modern circumstances, they could be seen as fitting under the 14th Amendment's exceptions. Wang shut down the idea that children of undocumented immigrants could be carved out by analogy, even as Kavanaugh pressed her on Congress's ability to rewrite the birthright citizenship statute to exclude them. She said Congress could only expand who is covered by birthright citizenship through changes to immigration law, not narrow it. Barrett, meanwhile, grilled Wang on her arguments as they applied to children on tribal lands and as they would apply in a hypothetical if the United States carved out a portion of a state from its jurisdiction. So they're obviously, pushing on it. Supreme Court justices appear skeptical of Trump's birthright citizenship order. The Supreme Court appeared highly skeptical of Trump's executive order limiting birthright citizenship, with several conservative justices tearing into the administration's reading of the history and precedents tied to the 14th Amendment citizenship clause. Trump again slams birthright citizenship after attending said oral arguments, an hour after he left at the end of the first half. Leaving the Supreme Court's oral argument on the matter, President Donald Trump again criticized birthright citizenship with a false claim he's made before.
We're the only country in the world stupid enough to allow birthright citizenship,
he posted on Lie Social. About 30 other countries also allow birthright citizenship. Trump listened to arguments in the court today for about 90 minutes, leaving shortly after the government concluded arguments on its position. So here is what some of the Supreme Court arguments were. Hi, I'm Paul Reeder. I'm curious how many questions the government gets asked about implementing Trump's birthright citizenship executive order. Also be watching whether there are any chance Trump wins the argument. I'm supposed to ask correspondent. Okay, I guess these are... Okay. Several high-profile guests attended today's arguments, but all eyes were on Trump. While some notable names were in attendance at the Supreme Court today, the focus remained on President Trump inside the courtroom. Oscar-winning actor Robert De Niro, a fierce critic of the president, attended oral arguments alongside other Trump officials, including Attorney General Pam Bondi and Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick. Trump is the first sitting president to attend Supreme Court arguments, according to the court's historical society. Yeah, so that is true, what I said before. He is the first sitting president to be there for this, which is definitely the kind of thing Trump likes to do. Break precedent, I guess. Former Trump lawyer and birthright citizenship opponent John Eastman was also in attendance. Okay. Alright, we already caught up. ACLU says courtroom was business as usual despite Trump appearance. Alright. Sauer says he needs to think through if Native Americans born now are birthright citizens. Oh no. During a somewhat awkward exchange with conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch, Solicitor General John D. Sauer struggled to say definitively whether he thought Native American children born today would be entitled to birthright U.S. citizenship under the type of ruling he's asking the Supreme Court to issue. Do you think Native Americans today are birthright citizens under your test? Gorsuch asked. I think so. I mean, obviously they've been granted citizenship by statute, Sauer said, referring to a federal law passed in the 1920s that ensured all Native Americans born within the U.S. would be granted citizenship. But the justice wanted Sauer to answer the question notwithstanding that law. Under the test, the Solicitor General is asking the court to adopt, which would grant birthright citizenship only to the children of non-citizens who intend to live permanently in the U.S., Gorsuch asked whether newly born Native American babies are still entitled to U.S. citizenship. I like how the way they're trying to go after birthright citizenship here is in, like, the least effective way, too. You know that if they actually went on the grounds of, like, well, now you have to intend to stay in the country to be viable for this, like, okay, they'll just lie and say they're intending to stay in the country. Like, this will change nothing, funnily enough. It'll definitely be, like, a step back, don't get me wrong. It'll be a symbolic loss, for sure. But it won't... I don't know if this will actually affect that many people, considering the fact that it's so specific. Like, I could see there being a lot of ways around this decision if it went in a bad way. Not that that would be a good thing or that I want it to go in a bad way. I'm just saying, I feel like this is the kind of thing that if they succeeded, it would practically have little to no effect on how many people are getting their citizenship when they're born here. But Trump and his administration would start running laps like, yo, look what we did, yo, birthright citizenship is dead, libtards molding, and, like, birthright citizenship is not even a little bit dead. The libtards aren't even, like, a little bit molding. I could definitely see a scenario like that happening with this. U.S. immigrant population in the U.S. by the numbers. Birthright citizenship ends, current policy remains. Without birthright citizenship, here's how the undocumented population would rise. So assuming it happened, I guess, in 2025 or 2026, it would go up by this much. I mean, I guess this is what they want. They want to be able to deport people, ideally with no cause. Oh, we've got drawings of what it looked like. There's the trumper right there. There's the guy. There's the dude. Look at that. Damn. Man, I should become an artist, but just in this style, so I can get the job where you draw the courtroom. Just that one job. Be the courtroom drawing guy. Wait, why is this a job that people have? Why don't they just take photos? They pay an artist to do this. You know, like... Okay. Anyway. It's illegal? It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. The fact it's illegal to bring a camera into the courtroom is pretty cringe and kinda gay, I'm not gonna lie. Anyway, folks. You're caught up. So I want to hear what you guys think of this whole situation down below in the comments section. Don't forget that commenting on this video helps a ton in the algorithm. It's how we get ahead and we get seen by more people and grow the channel, so I always appreciate a nice comment. I always appreciate a like on the video too. It helps a ton. Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell icon if you haven't already and you want to see more from me in the future. And of course, follow my social medias linked down below in the description. And finally, if you want to support me directly, financially, then you can always donate, subscribe, or gift a sub to support the channel on my website, or do it on YouTube. I always appreciate it, but regardless, thank you for watching as always, and have a good one.